Chase Elliott will sit out indefinitely due to fractured left tibia after suffering a snowboarding accident, and Joey Logano was not happy with Keselowski after an incident at Las Vegas Motor Speedway. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We got a ton of NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. We're going to go ahead and start by talking about Chevy. As through the first 3 NASCAR Cup Series races of the season, Chevy has won all 3 of them. This is the first time, if I'm not mistaken, that a manufacturer has won the first 3 races of the season in NASCAR Cup Series history. Ray Stoush Jr., of course, won the first race in the Daytona 500, then Kyle Busch won at Auto Club, and then William Byron just won the most recent race at Las Vegas Motor Speedway. Chevrolet has looked really strong to start the season, and they look to continue the really strong start they've had to 2023. We'll see if Chevy can continue that going into this upcoming weekend at Phoenix Raceway. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Jack Harvey. As after being sent to the hospital, and just for precautionary sake, Jack Harvey was released from the hospital later in the evening yesterday. This is really great to see. Jack Harvey was involved in an accident with Rinus VeeKay and Kyle Kirkwood in the IndyCar race at St. Petersburg. Glad to see he's been released from the hospital. He's got 4 weeks to basically recover, and I'm wishing the best of luck and glad to see that he has been released from the hospital. Really good stuff. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Kyle Busch. As Kyle Busch, of course, kind of talked about us on the channel on Friday night, but Kyle Busch won his first truck race with Chevrolet since 2007. Kyle Busch had the dominant truck, no surprise there. A lot of people are wondering if Kyle Busch Motorsports is going to be as strong as they were with Toyota, and so far they've looked really strong. And Kyle Busch has had a really good start to the year. Of course, won Auto Club about a week ago, and of course he won the truck race at Las Vegas. Massive congratulations there. He had Billy Baloo on the side of the car. Felt like a throwback 2007, seeing him win with Chevy. It was really exciting stuff. And congratulations to Kyle Busch on picking up the victory in the truck race at Las Vegas Motor Speedway. Really exciting stuff. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Jesse Little. As this is something really interesting, Jesse Little is now starting to direct NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series races. This is the first time that Jesse Little has basically directed. Jesse Little, of course, a former race car driver who not long ago a lot of people thought was a top prospect in NASCAR and a very underrated driver, but Jesse Little did not always at times get the best out of his car. So now he's directing Truck Series races, taking over for his late father, Chad Little. This is really exciting to see. I'm looking forward to see how well he's going to do managing these truck races as a director, and hopefully this means that we can see the truck races go a lot better with officiating. And it seemed like the Vegas truck race was better officiating for sure, and we got to see some really great racing. Overall, this is really good stuff, and I'm happy to see that Jesse Little got an opportunity to direct the Truck Series races. That's pretty exciting stuff overall for sure, to be honest with you. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Kevin Harvick. Now, Kevin Harvick spoke to Racing Boys not too long ago, and he believes that loyalty will be the key to Kyle Busch's bond with Richard Childress Racing. Now, Kevin Harvick, of course, had a lot of experience with Richard Childress Racing from 2001, or actually technically 2013. Kevin Harvick drove for Richard Childress Racing. Didn't win a Cup Series championship, but he did win 2 NASCAR Xfinity Series championships, which, of course, they were the Busch Series in 2001 and 2006. And Kevin Harvick, for many years, had a really great bond with Richard Childress. But by the end of that, he kind of lost that relationship and that bond with Richard Childress and eventually went over to Stewart-Haas Racing. I agree with Kevin Harvick 100%. I think that's going to be the major key factor to really helping out Kyle Busch be successful with Richard Childress Racing. Kyle didn't have as good of a run this past weekend in Las Vegas, but it seemed like Kyle Busch wasn't too mad on the radio, and it seems like that Richard really likes Kyle Busch being there, and I think that Richard Childress Racing, though, is going to continue to improve with Kyle Busch being over there. So overall, in my honest opinion, I agree with Kevin Harvick 100%, and I think that is going to be the key thing to having Kyle Busch in the seat and bring Richard Childress Racing a potential their first championship in nearly 30 years, because the last time Richard Childress Racing scored a championship was 1994 in the Cup Series. So they look to do that, and we'll see if it happens, but I agree with Kevin Harvick 100% that he's going to have a really good bomb in RCR. It's going to be how they communicate with each other and how will he perform, so we'll see what happens going forward overall. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about South Boston Speedway. Now, over the last couple of days, there's been some rumors and rumors about the future of South Boston Speedway. And according to Adam Stern and Chris Knight from Catchpens, the Mattioli family, which owns Pocono and South Boston, is forming a sale of South Boston per CEO Nick Igdalski. Now, it needs to be noted that one of the things that they play is that whoever takes over South Boston Speedway, if they can come in there and it could be an avid racing fan, so South Boston Speedway's future can continue on. So at least there's a positive right there. South Boston Speedway, of course, a legendary track for like late models, and also track that used to host NASCAR Busch Series races back in the day from about and also truck race, I think, all the way up to 2003 season. South Boston Speedway is a great track, in my opinion, and produced really great racing. So it is disappointing that they're trying to sell it off, but at least they're trying to sell it off to someone who has a lot of racing experience and really loves racing in general. So whoever does decide to take over the track itself, I hope that they can continue the great racing and the great trajectory of the series and the racing at the track itself. And I'm glad to see that whoever does take over. It's a shame they're selling it, don't get me wrong, but at the same token, at the same time, I hope that whoever decides to take it can do a really, really good job keeping the track up, because the track's had a really great history, and I hope they continue making the track as good as it can going forward. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about IndyCar. Now, as reported by Adam Stern on Friday afternoon, the IndyCar is looking at adding new races in the south and east portions of the U.S., and once again are entertaining offers for international races. Now, obviously, IndyCar has been interested maybe going back to the east and south. Of course, obviously, there's not a lot of races on the East Coast currently at the moment, or the south portion of the United States currently at the moment. But when you look at the IndyCar schedule has a lot of Midwest races and also West Coast races as well. So they're trying to fill that portion up just a little bit, and I think especially for the early portion of the season, to make the IndyCar schedule a lot bigger. So where could they race in the East and South? Well, obviously, there's a few locations they can go to. Number one, Pocono Speedway. They have not raced at Pocono, if I'm not mistaken, since 2019 season, so it's been about 4 years, and we know IndyCar has shown some interest in racing there. Another track is Homestead Miami Speedway. Homestead has not hosted an IndyCar race in nearly 10 or 11 years, if I'm not mistaken, so it's been a long time since IndyCar has raced up in that area. And then you also think about maybe in the South, maybe going back to NOLA Speedway. They hosted one IndyCar race in 2015. That could be a possibility. But wherever they do go race, or even Watkins Glen for that matter, IndyCar has not raced at Watkins Glen, I believe, since 2018 or 2019 season. So it's been a few years since they've raced at Watkins Glen. And I think IndyCar Watkins Glen would do wonders for the series. The track always hosts great racing regardless of what series races there. The track always produces really awesome and really great racing. So wherever they decide to go, I hope they can be very successful. But I'm glad that IndyCar is going and exploring different options and trying to go explore maybe going international. I think Montreal will be a great track to go for IndyCar. Or maybe they go out into Europe and race in Spa-Francorchamps perhaps. Also maybe up in Mexico where they go race in Mexico City. Anything's possible and nothing's guaranteed, but we'll be interested and we'll continue watching the story as it develops. But IndyCar needs to fill the schedule during the early portion of the season. They run St. Pete and they have 28 days off. That's not great for IndyCar, and I know that they've done a better job promoting this series, which is a really good thing in my opinion. But same token, same time, they need to find a way to bridge that gap and close that gap, in my opinion. Let's bridge and close that gap, because I think there's too much of a gap in the beginning of the season, in my honest opinion overall. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about the Bahrain GP. As obviously it was a pretty big motorsports day. F1 came back yesterday. We also had the IndyCar race, which we'll talk about here in a second, and then you had the Cup race in Las Vegas. The first one being the Bahrain Grand Prix. Now, the Bahrain Grand Prix was pretty much a straightforward race, and Max Verstappen put up a dominating clinic and won his first race of the 2023 season in his 36th career Formula One race. But the big story of the day was while Charles Leclerc basically blew an engine with about 15 laps ago, and Fernando Alonso ended up getting a podium position. Now, him getting a podium isn't the most surprising considering the fact that Aston Martin was really, really fast, but he was likely going to finish fourth instead of third before Charles Leclerc's motor blew up. Congratulations to Max Verstappen on winning the race, and also massive congratulations to Fernando Alonso on getting his first podium of 2023 and his 99th career podium. I think Aston Martin looks a lot better, and they may be the new second or third team for this year, which would be really refreshing to see because Red Bull is extremely dominant at at the moment. But I think that battle for second with Mercedes, Ferrari, and Aston Martin, I think is going to be really, really fun to watch. Hopefully Aston Martin can keep up with the development, and we can see Fernando Alonso potentially get a win this year, because that would be really fun, because it's been a long time since Fernando won. I think all the way back in 2013 was the last time Fernando Alonso won a Formula 1 race. So hopefully we can see this team continue to improve, and Aston Martin look really strong. But back to the other side of this, congratulations to him on winning the race at Max Verstappen, on winning the Bahrain Grand Prix. Massive congratulations to him. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about the muffler test. Now, according to Lee Spencer, he reports that NASCAR performed a muffler test this Wednesday at the Charlotte Roval in preparation for the Chicago Street Course race. Ryan Preece is currently scheduled to be there, and William Byron could end up being there because Chase Elliott was originally scheduled, but obviously Chase Elliott is currently out at the moment due to an injury, so William Byron will also potentially likely be at this upcoming next-gen test for the muffler test. Now, why are they doing a muffler test at Charlotte Roval? Well, a big reason why is because the Chicago Street Course is in a city. They actually did run mufflers at the LA Coliseum, and one of the reasons is for the long-term future, they can work on some of the muffler issues, because drivers were complaining about some carbon monoxide issues and fumes getting into the car. So that's another reason why they're continuing to test mufflers for Chicago Street Course race. And like I mentioned, they're going into a city, which is a massive and a big reason why they've gone ahead and said that they are going to be testing this. So hopefully we can eventually in the future get more races maybe in cities and more street courses on the schedule, though I don't want to see a lot of street courses. But this could be the only Chicago Street Course race, because obviously in the future there's a lot of question past this year, because I don't think they're going to cancel this event unless they do it at the last minute, which I think would be really, really foolish on NASCAR and the city's part, in my opinion. But we know that how Chicago be, and they really don't care, in my opinion, about that. That being said, though, I do personally think it's a good decision to have this muffler test, and we'll see how successful it is. It is a closed-off test. It will not be streamed from what I understand, so it will be closed off to the public, at least for the weekend, and I don't think the media will be even there as well. So it's an interesting choice for sure, but I think it's a good decision to have that test to get people prepared for that. And now we're going ahead on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Kyle Busch. Now, Kyle Busch was speaking to the media, and we'll have a couple stories around speaking to media around Kyle Busch. But Kyle Busch spoke on practice at Bristol Dirt, and I think he was joking and being sarcastic. He said, 2 hours, yeah, genius. It deteriorates tires, genius. Kyle Busch is, of course, definitely being very, very sarcastic, but you think about Bristol Dirt. They get 2 hours of practice for Bristol Dirt. But you think about all the other races. The other Cup Series races, they only get 20 minutes of practice for each session. And for Super Speed races, you get no practice at all. So it's a little bit frustrating, the fact that you get, 2 hours of practice for Bristol Dirt, and it makes a lot of sense, but it's only one race of the year they run at a dirt track. How is it the fact that the Cup Series only gets 20 minutes of practice at the other types of racetracks? And it just doesn't really make any sense to me, in my opinion, because of the group qualifying factor. And I get they want to get it in the TV window time and stuff, but you get so much practice for the Cup Series at Bristol Dirt more than any other race, and it just doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. But I do agree that I think getting practice at Bristol Dirt makes sense, but I think we need to give some of that practice time to the other races. In my opinion, for every NASCAR race, it should be 45 minutes. I think 45-minute practice sessions, one practice session. Everyone's on the track at the same time, though, and I think 45 minutes should be the session, in my honest opinion. So, in my honest opinion, I do understand why Kyle Busch is like this. I think, again, he's definitely being sarcastic, 100%. But in my opinion, I think that there should be a little bit more practice for some of these other NASCAR Cup Series races, because I think that the more practice you give, I think the better the drivers are generally going to be. So, in my opinion, there should be more practice, and I know Kyle Busch is kind of being sarcastic, but I think he's also not joking the fact that you get lack of practice on the other types of tracks, because they should get a little bit more practice, in my honest and sincere opinion, to be honest with you. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Romain Grosjean and Scott McLaughlin. Now, if you watched the IndyCar race at St. Petersburg, we'll talk about that here shortly. But late in the stages of the race, at about 30 laps to go in this race, we saw Romain Grosjean and Scott McLaughlin get into each other, with Scott McLaughlin being on cold tires and Romain Grosjean being on hotter tires. And had Romain Grosjean been able to clear Scott McLaughlin, he was probably going to run away with the win. However, Scott McLaughlin sent it into, I think, turn 2 or turn 3, and they both ran into the tire barriers. After that, Romain Grosjean was very unhappy and very, very pissed off and frustrated, and Scott McLaughlin also was not the happiest in the world, made a mistake, and got a penalty for avoidable contact. But after the race, Romain Grosjean and Scott McLaughlin spoke to each other and embraced after the race and were not unhappy with each other. So there's at least a really good sign at the end of the tunnel. There really wasn't any tempers between both of them. I know Romain was pissed off at the time. And I think it was the adrenaline because Romain Grosjean had a career day. He had one of the best cars in the field. And Romain Grosjean, if he runs like this, I know he didn't finish that great. Romain Grosjean has his pace throughout the year. He could be a legitimate championship contender. He had a great race. Unfortunately, it didn't end. And it really wasn't even Romain's fault because Scott McLaughlin was on cooler tires. He had a fast car that could have contended with Romain, but unfortunately took himself out of that because he decided to be a little bit over-aggressive, in my honest opinion, in that situation, and definitely 100% could have backed off. But that being said, they're bound for the win. It is what it is. Maybe it was a racing deal, but I personally think that was on Scott McLaughlin and should have backed off. But I'm glad to see both of them have no hard feelings toward each other. It's good that they embraced after the race and happy to see that there wasn't any tension between both of them. So at least it's a positive right there. And glad to say there's no tempers between them. They weren't mad at each other after the race because, in my opinion, you don't want those guys being mad at each other. You want them being as happy as possible. And glad to see that both drivers are not angry at each other after the incident, to be honest with you. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the St. Petersburg Grand Prix. Now, we've talked about a couple stories in the St. Petersburg Grand Prix, but now let's talk about the St. Petersburg Grand Prix overall as a whole. This race was an absolute wreck fest and a lot of chaos. It started on lap 1, where there's a big wreck on, I think, turn 3 or turn 4, where you had Felix Rosenqvist got hip-checked by Scott Dixon, and then everyone else basically checked up. Santino Ferrucci, I think, ran in the back of Julio Castroneves or Simon Pagenaud, and a lot of drivers ended up going over and wrecking. Julio was limping, but he seemed to be okay, and everyone from that incident was okay. Then a little bit later down the road, Connor Daly spun out. Then a few laps later, you saw an incident between Marinus BK where you had the Jack Harvey and Kyle Kirkwood incident. Then you had a situation between Will Power and Colton Herta, where in my opinion, I don't think that Will Power was completely at fault. I would say that was a questionable call on their part, in my opinion. And then after that, kind of went green for a very, very long time. And then you had the Romain Grosjean and Scott McLaughlin incident. And then after that, it looked like it was going to be a win for Pat O'Ward. But then Marcus Ericsson had a faster car. And Pat O'Ward made a very crucial and very bad mistake and lost first position and lost the race. And Marcus Ericsson would come off the corner to win a race at the St. Petersburg Grand Prix. Marcus Ericsson this year is a championship favorite, in my opinion. He has looked really confident to start this year, has had a really strong start to the 2023 season, in my opinion. He did a fantastic job, did amazing, did a really, really great job behind the wheel, and he wasn't probably going to win the race. Romain and Scott McLaughlin got into each other, but he ran top 5 all day long, and he got me in the right position at the right time, and that's his 4th career IndyCar victory, and all 4 races that he's won have been red flag races. But to see Marcus Ericsson win, massive congratulations to him. Well-deserved win, in my opinion, and a great day for Scott McLaughlin nonetheless. So, congratulations to him on picking up the victory in the St. Petersburg Grand Prix. He'll be looking to be a championship contender in 2023, and we'll see what he does throughout the 2023 season. We'll see what he can do, and we'll see how well he performs throughout the 2023 IndyCar season. Now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Josh Berry. Now, Josh Berry, of course, was this weekend substituting for Chase Elliott after suffering a leg injury and a fractured left tibia. Josh Berry was substituting for this weekend at Las Vegas Motor Speedway. And after making his debut, he actually spoke on his debut. He actually said he had a lot of fun inside the car, but he also said that during the race, he had some sort of throttle issues and some throttle body issues. This, of course, was the first time a Josh Berry drove the 9 car, could run more races this season in substitution for Chase Elliott. In his debut, he finished 29th. Now, I saw a lot of people on social media that were really going after Josh Berry in this race. But let me say one thing for Josh Berry, and I'll give some huge defense to Josh Berry. Josh Berry, before this weekend, had not even no simulator experience in this car, had no experience at the next-gen car. So he's at a complete disadvantage. And I saw on social media throughout the weekend a lot of people bashing Josh Berry because everyone thought that Josh Berry was going to come into this weekend and that Josh Berry was going to perform like Chase Elliott was. Let me explain something. Josh Berry, like I mentioned, had no simulator experience and had not been behind the wheel of a next-gen car before this weekend. So a lot of people should not have had those expectations. And there were times in the race where he had top 10 speeds on the racetrack. And again, he had a throttle body issue. And let's also remember, the last time we were here at Las Vegas Motor Speedway, the 9 team struggled horrendously. They were like 20th to 25th a lot of the day. They were completely off the pace and struggled. So I'm not sure if it's more of a 9-car thing than more of a Josh Berry thing. So I think Josh Berry did the best he could. He should have had no expectations coming into the weekend, and people should have had pretty realistic expectations for Josh Berry. For a guy, like I mentioned, had no experience for getting into the next-gen car. So in my opinion, he did the best he could and did a solid job for his first time. I think if he gets another opportunity, which we'll have to wait and see if he gets another opportunity, I think he deserves another chance, and we'll see what happens going forward. But I think he deserves another opportunity. He did the best he could in his debut. They had some issues with the car that were very similar. We've seen this in the past, some throttle body issues because he couldn't go full throttle around the racetrack, and I think it affected him near the end of the race. So, in my opinion, he deserves another opportunity, but we'll see if Hendrick Motorsports does give him another chance here in the foreseeable future. We'll just have to wait and see what happens, see if they do give him another opportunity and another chance. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Ross Chastain. Now, a story that I've not seen a ton of people talk about is about Ross Chastain. And apparently, Ross Chastain is actually interested in running IndyCar races. This is really, really interesting because I think Ross Chastain said that he spoke to Connor Daly about this, but this is very interesting because Ross Chastain, of course, is a driver who's going to be very, very crazy. But he's not the first driver in NASCAR Cup Series paddock that has shown some interest in wanting to run IndyCar races. Ryan Blaney showed some interest at the Indy Road Course race during the Indy NASCAR Double. Kyle Larson, of course, is going to run the Double for 2 years in 2024 and 2025. And Kyle Busch is also wanting to run the Indianapolis 500 as well. Now, one thing that needs to be noted is that Justin Marks has said that Trackhouse is also interested in running some IndyCar races as well, and they want to go to IndyCar racing. That's something in the long-term plans in the future. So if Trackhouse Racing was to say run the Indy 500 because they're interested in running the Indy 500, they could bring Ross Chastain over. And I think it'd be really fun to have Ross Chastain run the Indianapolis 500 because Ross Chastain has got a really great personality, has a really, really great character. And like I said, I think it'd be fun to have him over running an IndyCar. Now, do I think Ross Chastain would be extremely successful? I'm not entirely sure, but it would be a really great learning experience and a really great opportunity for Ross Chastain to get in the IndyCar series and see what he can do, improve his work, improve his stuff, and see what he can be able to accomplish behind the wheel of an IndyCar. We're going to see other NASCAR drivers get the opportunity, I think, in the future, and I think especially with the Laura chassis and all that stuff, he might already know what he's doing. But I think it'd be really fun for Ross Chastain to come over and run some IndyCar races. I hope it does happen, and we'll see if he does decide to run some IndyCar races in the future, especially if Trackhouse decides to go ahead and run maybe IndyCar in the future, because like I mentioned, they are interested in going into IndyCar. So we'll see what happens going forward. We'll see if Trackhouse ever decides to show up in IndyCar, and we'll see if Chastain does it, because I would love for Chastain to get an opportunity to run some IndyCar races in the foreseeable future. I think it'd be really, really fun overall, to be honest with you. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Austin Hill. As after winning the NASCAR Xfinity Series race at Las Vegas and getting 2 of the first 3 wins of the 2023 season, Austin Hill spoke to the media after race, and he wants to stay with Rich Strauss Racing going into next year. And he says next year he wants to try to convince Richard Strauss to get a 3rd charter so he can move up to the Cup Series in 2024. Now, Austin Hill, in my honest opinion, he definitely deserves an opportunity to go to Cup next year. Now, he obviously will run 6 races all together this year with Beard Motorsports. Of course, he failed to qualify for the Daytona 500, but he's going to have 5 more opportunities to race in the Cup Series with Beard Motorsports. But I think he wants to go full-time in the Cup Series with Rich Strauss Racing next year. And if I think there's anybody that deserves an opportunity in the lower series right now with Rich Strauss Racing to get an opportunity to jump up the Cup, it is Austin Hill. And it would be a pretty stout lineup if Austin Hill was able to go Cup racing next year, because you would have Austin Dillon. The 3 car, I think, has really improved to start this year. I know that this past weekend in Vegas did not go well for Rich Strauss Racing. Kyle Busch has already won a race with them. And then Austin Hill, I think, is a very talented driver. But what's the one thing that he is going to need if he's going to want to move up? And that is a charter. And that's the big thing. Charters right now are extremely expensive. Now, where could they get the charter from? I think about Spire Motorsports. Spire Motorsports right now is a 2-car organization. And I know they just got rid of their drivers association, a drivers thing that they've had for a long time, where they've had the branding and like all that kind of stuff. But in my opinion, Spire Motorsports should focus on 1 car and keep Corey LaJoie in that number 7 car. In my opinion, the 77 car needs to give up their charter. Ty Dillon has struggled in the first 3 races with Spire Motorsports. He has finished outside the top 30 in all 3 races. I think he's only had one top 30 finish, maybe being a 30th place at Auto Club, but they've struggled so bad to start the year with that 77 car. If I was smart and if I was Spire Motorsports, I'm giving up my charter and handing it over to Rich Schultz Racing. I think Spire does have an association with Hendrick, but if I was, in my opinion, I would give up the charter to Rich Schultz Racing, give it to them, hand it over to them, and give them a third charter so we can see Austin Hill jump up to the Cup Series full time. Because no disrespect to Ty Dillon, but Ty Dillon has not done much in Cup. He really hasn't done much, and I think he'd do a lot better in Xfinity than he would in Cup. I think, in my opinion, let's get that charter from Spire over so Austin Hill can jump up to the Cup Series because, like I said, I think Austin Hill 100% deserves an opportunity to jump up to the Cup Series, and we'll see what happens going forward. But like I said, he deserves an opportunity to jump up to the Cup Series, and he needs to do it because they need to get him up there. Austin Hill is already, in my opinion, a championship threat in Xfinity. He's a multi-time winner in Xfinity already this year. 2 of the first 3 races he's already won. One at Daytona, was extremely fast at Auto Club, and won at Vegas. I think people are looking at right now as a championship favorite. I know we're only 3 races in, but I think Hill right now is a championship favorite. And I think in the near and foreseeable future, I think you're going to see him up in Cup full-time next year. If Richard Schultz Racing, of course, gets that third charter, which they're going to have to get that third charter if they're going to want to move up the Cup next year. So we'll see what happens, but I think that he deserves an opportunity to jump up to the Cup Series, and hopefully he will get that opportunity in the near and foreseeable future. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Christopher Bell and Bubba Wallace. Now, after the NASCAR Cup Series race at Las Vegas Motor Speedway, where Bubba Wallace and Christopher Bell, I believe, both finished in the top 5 or near the front, they had a conversation on pit road, and it seemed like they were very unhappy with each other. There was a little bit of talk on pit road, a little bit of discussion. Apparently, according to John Haverland, who had the interview, apparently they were very, very unhappy, and Christopher Bell apparently was really, really pissed. It apparently might have been on that late race restart. Obviously, Bubba Wallace had a great day, ran top 5 all day long, had one of his best runs he's had in a long time, and his best run so far of the 2023 season. And it's great for Bubba Wallace to have a really good run with 23XI Racing. And he was the best finishing non-Hendrick driver of the day, so that's something that they can really go away with. Christopher Bell had a pretty solid day for sure, but it's interesting to see both of them have a conversation. We didn't really know what they were pissed off about. I didn't get to see a replay. I think it had to do something maybe with the late race restart. It happened on the last one, which I think might affect Christopher Bell getting a worse finish. But they weren't mad at each other after. This is something that we're going to have to see what kind of comes out of this, and we'll have to see if Christopher Bell does explain it. But also, Bubba did talk about the fact that it seemed like Toyota was a little bit off compared to the Hendrick cars, which, of course, Hendrick Motorsports being the dominant team isn't a shock or surprising, and they just looked so dominant in this race, finishing 1, 2, 3. But in my opinion, it was just really interesting to see how frustrated, they both were with each other getting mad on pit road. They did pat see on the back after, so it seemed like it wasn't too much. There's probably a little bit of discussion after the race. Maybe they weren't mad at each other at all, but it seemed like Christopher Bell was very unhappy with Bubba Wallace after the race, and there was some tension that spiraled after the race. So in my opinion, it's just interesting, and overall, we'll have to see if something comes out of it, and we'll see if maybe Christopher Bell responds to the situation, because Bubba didn't really respond to Christopher Bell after they got interviewed. I think Bell also kind of kept quiet after, and we'll see maybe down the road if there are more tensions between these two. But they need to work together as Toyota teammates, because in my opinion, they are Toyota teammates, and they need to work together so they can form at the best of their abilities, because Toyota is a little bit behind the Chevys right now. Chevys look so strong to start this year, but Toyota's did look solid in the race. They could have won this race, and we'll see what happens going forward down the road, and we'll see if these two have more tension going forward. But in my opinion, if they can focus on forming as well as they can, I think that they'll be in the best shape that they could be as a team and as an organization at 23XI and also the other organizations at Toyota. So they need to focus on not being frustrated with each other and perform the best of their abilities, in my opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the first of 2 major stories in today's episode as we're talking about Brad Keselowski and Joey Logano. Now, it's no secret that over the last few years when Brad Keselowski was at Team Penske, him and Joey Logano were not big fans of each other. And I'm not sure if Joey Logano is also a fan of Brad Keselowski at this moment. So, on one of the late race restarts at about 80 laps to go in the race, Brad Keselowski and Joey Logano had some contact. They were battling 3 wide coming down the front stretch. You had Kyle Busch on the bottom of the track. You had, of course, Logano on the top and Brad Keselowski in the middle. Throughout the day, Joey Logano completely struggled, and that 22 car just was running bad, and Penske in general was off the pace, which is surprising considering historically at this track, they've ran really, really good. but they were 3 wide coming down the front stretch, and Brad Keselowski kind of pitched Logano into the outside wall. Logano hit the outside wall very, very hard. He went through the grass, got a ton of damage, went airborne, damaged the diffuser, and unfortunately Logano fell out of the race and finished last. This is also the first time, if I'm not mistaken, that the pole sitter has finished last in the race since, I think, Ryan Preece technically in the 2020 Toyota 500. Now, Joey Logano also got interviewed after the race, and Logano seemed very unhappy and spoke on the wrecking situation. He says he got pinched by Brad Keselowski and says, it is what it is. So are we going to see tension between both Joey Logano and Brad Keselowski for teammates? I would say there potentially is possibly we could see tension between these two. Now, if you want my honest opinion on the situation with Joey Logano and Brad Keselowski, I think it was just more of a racing deal than anything else because they were 3 wide coming down the front stretch. I understand Logano being frustrated and mad and pissed off at Brad Keselowski because Logano was trying to make a move and they were 3 wide and racing really hard with 85 laps to go. But that's racing for you. And that was one of the best moments of the race right there. Not seeing Logano crash out, but just a great racing 3 wide and 4 wide at points in this race. But Logano, to be fair, did get pinched up, and Keselowski might be at fault. But to me, in my personal opinion, I think it was just a racing incident and a racing deal. And sometimes you're going to have racing deals that are going to go wrong. You're going to have times where drivers make mistakes on the track and end up having some major, major issues and crashing each other. So in my opinion, it was just a racing deal and a racing situation. I don't think anybody's completely at fault. Some are going to put blame on Keselowski. Some are going to put blame on Logano for basically kind of forcing Keselowski to make it 3 wide there. But I think, in my opinion, it was just a racing incident and a racing deal. And I think, in my opinion, I don't think anybody's completely at fault for the situation. I think it was just a racing incident overall. And in my opinion, I don't want to see these two wreck each other out in other situations. I want to see them focus on trying to have great runs because Penske needs to focus on their speed because they struggle throughout the weekend. And in my honest opinion, I don't think anybody's completely at fault for the situation, in my opinion. And now we're going ahead into the final major story and the biggest story of the day as we're talking about Chase Elliott. Now, obviously, I did a breaking news story on my channel on Friday talking about the Chase Elliott situation. And there are more updates that have come out as of recently. So Saturday, there was a press conference that came out, and it was confirmed that Chase Elliott will be out indefinitely, will be out for several weeks due to having surgery from a fractured left tibia that he suffered in a snowboarding accident. Of course, Josh Berry substituted for Chase Elliott this weekend, but Chase Elliott, as it was confirmed, will be out for several weeks due to basically the injuries that he has suffered. Now, Hendrick Motorsports has applied a waiver, and they have not been confirmed if they will get the waiver or not at this current time, as Chase Elliott needs to come back, and I think they'll look at the Kurt Busch situation, where Kurt Busch was out for the rest of the year, and I don't want to completely give a waiver just yet to Chase Elliott, but they have applied for a waiver. I would imagine that they are going to get the waiver for Chase Elliott. Now, there have been a lot of discussion on social media about Chase Elliott being able to go do whatever he wants to, and a lot of people wonder, why did Chase Elliott go out there and go snowboarding in a dangerous activity during a race weekend? Well, you guys have to understand one thing. NASCAR, there are contracts and stipulations for some teams but others, and some drivers actually spoke on this. First, HMS, of course, also confirmed during the press conference that they're not changing anything up with how they're ruling on what drivers are allowed to do. It's just a driver's responsibility to be really, really careful. And they're not letting the driver stop enjoying what they want to do. And a lot of other team owners also agree. Kevin Harvick and Denny Hamlin, Kyle Larson, among others, actually spoke. Kevin Harvick says that he tells his KHI drivers to basically just go do whatever you do. It's your responsibility, but just go have a lot of fun. Denny Hamlin also said that, and plus he basically said if you don't let, basically, it's not just a physical thing, but a mental thing, and kind of mental warfare in a sense. When you're basically at a racetrack for 38 weeks or 40 weeks for that matter, you need to let these guys have a little bit of downtime and let them have their time to go do what they want to do. Denny Hamlin basically echoed the same thing that Kevin Harvick said on social media and also getting interviewed. Brad Keselowski said the same thing as well. And Kyle Larson also spoke that they're not stopping that situation. And Kyle Busch also has reached out to Chase Elliott. Actually, said on Series 7 that because Kyle Busch, of course, suffered a very, very similar injury to Chase Elliott. He spoke about this basically saying that, well, why, basically Joe Gibbs said, why are you going to race? And then basically Kyle Busch got injured in a Joe Gibbs car. So basically Kyle Busch got injured in very similar situation because Kyle Busch sat out for about 15 or 16 weeks and sat out for a very long time. And Kyle has reached out to Chase Elliott, and once Chase Elliott's able to speak on the situation, he would be able to speak to Kyle. Now, on a more positive side of things, Chase Elliott was released from the hospital, and he had a really good, basically thanked everyone, had a really good sense of humor. It's basically made a joke about a script and saying that the March script really wasn't there. Basically said, I guess the March script was messed up, but he said in all seriousness, thank everyone and appreciate Josh for coming through. Now, Chase Elliott is also expected to later today begin physical therapy, so he will be expected to begin physical therapy later this week. So starting today, he should be getting physical therapy. Jeff Andrews spoke after the race because, of course, William Byron won, and he spoke to the media, and he says a decision will be made on who will substitute for Chase Elliott at Phoenix. A decision will be coming sometime later today, and probably by the time you're watching this video, we will know who will be driving the number 9 car for Hendrick Motorsports. Now, obviously, the big questions are a few questions on Chase Elliott. Number one, how long will Chase Elliott be out? I think the fact that it's a fractured left tibia, and from what people are saying, I know Hendrick said several weeks. Personally, from what I've seen people say on social media, it could be as long as 3 to 6 months, and Chase Elliott might be out for the rest of the regular season. The hope is that with him already beginning physical therapy, that he could be back as quick as possible. But if I'm Hendrick Motorsports, I'm not rushing Chase Elliott back. We want Chase Elliott back at his healthiest point, and we want him back as quick as possible back to the racetrack. You want to get him but you don't want him back too quickly. They need to take this as slowly as possible to make sure Chase is back in a healthy position, which means he could be also out for the rest of the season, but I would have to imagine that Hendrick Motorsports is going to do their best to try to get Chase Elliott back to the racetrack, but I think they're going to try to be as quick as possible because the most important thing is making sure that Chase Elliott takes the time to get as healthy as possible to get back to the racetrack because that's the most important thing. The other big question is, will Hendrick Motorsports get a waiver? I would have to imagine they're going to get a waiver because I know people were questioning why, and I think a lot of people are asking, why should Chase Elliott get a waiver? Well, you look back to about 7 years ago when Tony Stewart suffered a dune buggy crash and before the season began, he got a waiver. So I would have to imagine that Chase Elliott would get a waiver, and if Matt Kenseth can get a waiver for basically not having a car for the first 2 weeks, I would have to imagine that Chase Elliott is going to get a waiver. And then the other thing I've seen on social media, and a lot of people have been bashing Chase Elliott about this, but why was Chase Elliott in the first place going snowboarding during a race weekend? Well, I am going to explain very, very well. Here's the couple things. Teams have the option on their contracts to tell drivers they're not allowed to do certain things. They can either, one, tell them they can't go do anything. Number two, you can't do it during the race weekends. And number three, they can have as much free time as possible. And I stand with the third decision. I've seen a lot of people bashing Chase Elliott on this and saying that he shouldn't be able to go do whatever he wants to do because he's got a job. These guys have 38 to 40 weeks. And do you think that they always have free time? No, absolutely not. And you could get injured in anything. Even if you're bubble wrap, you still could get injured. Look at Daniel Hemrick, for example. Daniel Hemrick was doing a workout and is in crutches right now. And he's raced the last 2 weeks on crutches. So you can get injured in any position. And Chase Elliott is an experienced snowboarder. He's had experience doing snowboarding in the past. So you can't get mad at Chase Elliott for wanting to go do what he wants to do and have fun. Plus, they were on the West Coast swing. He's got a house up in Colorado. So he has experience snowboarding as a kid. So he knows what he's doing, and unfortunately just got an accident. I know Chase Elliott feels really, really bad and appreciates sports. He really appreciates all the support from the fans and all the people that have shown support them from the drivers and stuff. But in my honest opinion, we should not be getting on Chase Elliott for just wanting to have a little bit of fun. I think he should be able to have as much fun as he wants to and should be able to do what he wants to do. I understand people trying to be concerned for his safety and stuff. I just saw some comments on social media that just frustrated me about this. But in my opinion, Chase Elliott should be able to go do what he wants to do, and he should be able to have as much fun as he wants to. And the fact that people think that drivers should be restricted and put in bubble wrap is stupid to me. And I'm glad that at least Hendrick Motorsports ain't changing anything up, and I think most team owners aren't changing anything up, which is how I think it should go, in my honest opinion. So we're all wishing Chase Elliott speedy recovery. I hope he gets back on track as soon as possible, but he needs to take the time and take as much time as he wants to. If it means he takes off the rest of the season, it is what it is. So in my opinion, hopefully he can take the procedures to get back to the racetrack as soon as possible. Hopefully he'll get back to the racetrack here very, very soon here in the near future. But I wish him the best of luck and wishing him a speedy recovery as well. So that is going to be today's NASCAR news and motorsports news video. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please like and subscribe to the channel, notifications on, so be notified when a video does go live on my channel. Follow me Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support me on Patreon as well. Links description below for that, and comment below your thoughts below on today's episode. What are your thoughts about the Chase Elliott situation? Let me know in the comments below. And what are your thoughts about Keselowski and Joey Logano getting into it at Las Vegas? Let me know in the comments below. Tomorrow on my channel, we're going to have multiple videos on the channel. We are likely going to have the NASCAR entry list for the Phoenix weekend with whoever gets in the car. Unless, of course, we do get the breaking news. We probably are going to be discussing about who will be substituting for Chase Elliott either today or tomorrow on the channel, potentially. And then, of course, we will have the Xfinity Series race picks. And then, of course, Wednesday will be another NASCAR news video. We got a lot of content on the way as well as we're getting close to the Phoenix weekend. And, of course, we'll talk about that next-gen test as well at Phoenix that's going to happen on the Friday 50-minute practice session. So anyway, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode, and I'll see you guys next time for some more great, awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.